everyone, welcome to an episode of Inez Talks UX. Today we are joined remotely by David Schultz, a current co-founder and chief designer at Glissade Design, previously VP of design at Kesson and Nomad Health. Thank you, David, for joining me today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited.
It'd be great if people don't know already, just for you to kind of introduce yourself, a bit about your background and kind of where you are now.
Yeah, thank you. David Schultz. I kind of always been a designer, I think, since I was a little kid. I mean, Lego blocks is always what I played with, and thought I wanted to become a car designer and thought you had to be an engineer to do that. And I made it through Calc 1, but by the time I failed Calc 2 twice, it was pretty obvious that engineering was not my path. And so kind of a funny story, my dad said, I think you really want to go to Art Center in Southern California. That's kind of the big car design school. I wrote a letter to Porsche, and a lot of people don't realize the name of Porsche, the company, is actually the founder's whole title. It's Dr. Ing HCF Porsche. And so I got a letter back from, who knows, some PR person, whatever, saying go to Art Center. And but it had that whole title on the bottom. And I thought, oh my God, I got a letter back from Ferry Porsche. Like Ferry Porsche is telling me to go to Art Center. Like, of course. It was literally a couple decades later that I finally figured out, like, oh no, that's just the company letterhead. Like this is not Porsche writing me. But anyway, I loaded up the car and headed. I drove across country. They lost my portfolio, so I didn't know that I was accepted until I think about Colorado or something, driving cross country. But anyway, was very interested in car design. But then realized that actually the product design projects were more interesting to me, so kind of shifted to that direction. And I think that's one of the things that I've been thinking about more recently is, I'm pretty comfortable with the idea of shifting directions, and so I think that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is how design is shifting. And so I've been from an early age pretty comfortable with that idea of like design changes. Spent a long time as an industrial designer, but then, like a lot of industrial designers, the market really did shift towards UX design, and that's where the interesting projects were, the opportunities and everything. So it's been kind of a long transition. I've spent, the past, 20, 25 years really shifting and focus on UX design issues. And one of the things that, has got us excited about too in Glissade. It's interesting, in the early days of your career, you dream of being a design leader, and then you become a design leader and you realize, I don't get to work on design anymore. It's all about HR stuff and, business meetings and priorities and all this stuff. And so we've been taking the opportunity to say, no, okay, we're at the stage of our career where we want to refocus on design, and especially because we believe that design is shifting, that design's changing, and AI is causing a fundamental shift in really all product development, design just being part of it. And so that's what we're focused on with Glissade, is basically looking for patterns of experience challenges that companies have, taking just standard AI capabilities that are out there. There's only a few companies that can afford to, build their own large language models like Gemini and ChatGPT 4.0 and all these, right? So taking available technologies and putting together solutions that simplify a lot of these, challenges that companies have. So yeah, that's kind of where we got to. And so it's been fun to kind of refocus on, what's happening with design, and not just, hey, what's the next release at a company.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, a lot of like designers, design leaders I speak to, I mean, they probably go through a similar transition to yourself sometimes, where it's like, I really want to get back to that craft of, design. And I speak to a lot of leaders all the time where they just say, well, almost, like a glorified HR manager, where obviously it's great to lead the team, the strategy and stuff, but you end up sort of doing a lot of that type of thing rather than, the things that you initially love to do in the first place. So, I guess it's a great time, a crossroads in your life where you were able to kind of open that up again, and obviously kind of wishing like the best things for Blizzard. And I'm sure kind of based on this conversation, everyone's going to see what good things you kind of have in store anyway. But
Well, hope
I guess
so. We'll keep fingers crossed
yeah,
on that. Yeah, but thank you. Yeah.
no, all good. But yeah, I guess probably just like to kickstart the kind of the conversation really was I know we've been mentioning, you just mentioned then when you were chatting around the challenges design face today and the difference between kind of UX versus kind of UI and design thinking. So I guess just from kind of your perspective, would love to kind of hear more about that and what you think the biggest challenges designers face today is.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time. I mean, in as late as 2022, design was one of the hottest. UX design was one of the hottest professions out there, right? And every designer I talked to was getting multiple job offers all the time. Salaries were growing, teams were growing, et cetera. And it seems at the end of 2022, it just kind of stopped across the industry. And we've all heard stories of tons of different layoffs. Really talented designers having trouble getting jobs, and just, a sort of like almost instantaneous reversal of a lot of these successes that we've gained. And so it's prompted us to have a lot of conversations about what's going on. And I think I think it speaks to this sea change that we're potentially just starting in design. Because the most interesting thing about it, I think, is, there's so much conversation about the challenges that design is facing, yet at the same time, AI is really the most interesting design challenge of my career for certain. We've been on this journey with computing where, you think back to the very early days. To use a computer, you had to know how to create punch cards. And then eventually it became like command prompts. And there's been gradual progression for engaging with computers to be more and more natural. And now, we all have touch devices in our pockets and that connect to data all over the place. But it's still, even there with UI, you're kind of saying, the computer's saying, this is my structure, you are going to engage on my terms with this, right? And with AI, it's this huge leap forward. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to AI, but one of them is the interaction model is becoming almost human-like in some respects. But it's not a human, right? It's a computer. And so how we create a more natural engagement that feels human-like, but doesn't confuse people as to, hey, it's not really human. That's an unbelievable design challenge. So the most interesting, and again, that's where all the investment is. So I think there's this disconnect between the opportunity and how business is perceiving it. That we should be having tons of incredible opportunities right now, and most designers aren't. And I think that speaks to a disconnect. Which again, I think, we're going to have to transform our thinking a little bit to reconnect to this incredible opportunity in front of us.
No, it makes total sense. I think, I mean, we're probably going to mention it a lot of times, but speaking to people all the time where it's like, don't shy away from this AI movement. Lots of people do. And I speak to people who were kind of doing design for many years, and they were like, when web came out, everyone was like, when, mobile apps and everything, kind of the new wave, everyone's always been like hesitant, but AI is just going to, it's something that designers and everyone really needs to just be open-minded with, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting how many people are dismissive because of, some of the hype and some of the failures of AI systems. And we kind of forget, hey, AI has been around for decades. Every time you use mapping, every time you see personalization on any kind of tool, even the driving assists in your car and in modern cars, right? These are all AI systems that we take for granted. Siri, right? Speech to text, spell check. They're all like, so it's not coming. It started, coming, like I said, decades ago. It's here and it's real. But there's, it requires design engagement to create experiences that really deliver properly for people.
100%, 100%. And
Yeah.
is there any kind of opportunities, like you mentioned, around sort of businesses? It's an opportunity for businesses to engage differently with kind of AI and design in general. Have you got sort of any specific ideas around that, or is it sort of too soon to sort of say, or about how they can sort of like adapt to those changes?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and again, it speaks to the need for design to evolve for businesses to see that need. But so many of the failures of AI systems that we've been hearing about are really a lack of context on both sides, right? So an AI is listening to a user, trying to figure out what they want, and then it's giving results, but it's results generated by a computer, right? By a generative AI system, and so if it doesn't understand what the user wants and it doesn't deliver the results in such a way that the user can understand what they're getting and why they're getting what they're getting and what are the limitations, then people throw up their hands and say, like, this thing's a joke. It didn't do the right thing, but again, I think it's going to require sort of a new type of design, for us to be in the center of that conversation. But as more and more companies struggle with correctly implementing these unbelievable technologies, I think they'll start to say, hey, we need somebody else in there helping, the handoff both directions, from human to computer and from computer back to human.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, I guess a question to you, and it's still the unknown really, but I wonder if we'll be seeing more titles like AI product designer specifically on people's profiles that, they are the ones that can come in and solve that specific issue around kind of AI. I appreciate at the moment there's many teams where I was even actually speaking to a design leader yesterday. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me mentioning it, but in his company, there is a dedicated person within the design team that is like, okay, this is your job to really go and learn all this AI, and because they wanted to, obviously, but and they're going to be that dedicated designer around that to really bring all that insight and obviously share it with the wider team as well. But I wonder if that kind of will then progress to those designers who are the kind of subject experts being kind of that AI designer, really.
I 100% believe that. I've been trying to figure out, like, what would we call this? My wife came up with the name reflexive designer, which I actually like a lot. I think that speaks to a lot of the issue, where it's fundamentally giving back to you and reflecting back to you, what your interest is as a user. And I think this is going to rub a lot of UX designers the wrong way, because they're going to say, wait a minute, I've dedicated my entire career to designing user experiences through software, and this is just another version. But I do think it's something new, and again, having experienced it myself, you could say in the early days of software design, hey, it's a graphical user interface. Graphic designers should be the people who do this, right? Or it's really designed for industry. Industrial designers should be the one to do this. And in both cases, it's like, yes, you have core skills that are incredibly, design, at the core, design is the same as it's been for 100 years, right? We fundamentally learn about users. We generate sort of an understanding of their profile. We now call it persona, right? We generate a bunch of ideas, prototype, test, refine, iterate, and then create guidance for product development teams to build this new thing, right? So those core skill sets haven't changed in well over 100 years, but the implementation and the work and the process and some of the deliverables, especially that we do, has changed quite a bit. And that's why I think, it is a new form of design that's going to be evolving and with new approaches and new deliverables to solve these kind of problems. And it's not classically UX design or other previous, iterations of design. It's close, and UX designers have the core skill sets to do it, but they'll also have to learn new ways of thinking and new technologies, et cetera.
Yeah, I guess just being super adaptable to the ongoing changes. I guess it's when, even similarly to like when design systems became more popular, lack of better words, and everyone's like, okay, cool. It's, always adapting your skills and changing with the movement. So that, I guess, takes us into kind of something else that we were really speaking about, kind of design thinking. Obviously, everyone, mentions design thinking. It's in the interview stages, it's in portfolios, it's in probably everyone's everyday today, job while they're working and everything like that. So obviously that's been celebrated as well, and often sometimes critiqued. So I guess, do you feel like it's like devalued the profession by making kind of everyone in a company a designer?
Yeah, it's really been interesting. The sort of two pillars of this explosion of investment in design, is UX UI, or UI UX, as I keep hearing it called. It makes me crazy. Even design firms I've seen calling it UI UX, and it's like, really, you say cart horse? But design thinking, it's interesting because it was incredibly valuable for the profession in a lot of ways. A lot of us got a lot of career opportunities because of the growth and investment in design, because of that. And was instrumental in creating a lot of very senior leadership positions and things like that. The problem is, I think it was just heavily oversold, and this idea that, hey, design is not design; it's actually a business transformation strategy, and we're going to come in and teach everybody how to create thousands of sticky notes and innovate in every aspect of the business, and every employee, as we talked about before, this whole thing of like every employer's got to think like a designer. And where I knew it had really gone off the rails, one of the examples, a designer from my team at IBM came back from this whole design thinking training session when she was first onboarding with the company, and she met an MBA, business product person there. And that MBA person was telling her that she's a design thinking expert, and she's like, wait a minute, you're not a designer. And this MBA was like, oh, no, design thinking's got nothing to do with design. And it's like, okay, now I know something has gone off the rails here. And I think we've seen, that first of all, not a lot of companies have been able to really see benefit from this, or enough benefit for the investment. And secondly, look, it's always been design, right? Companies that create beautifully designed products that are easy to use and intuitive and attractive and all this, they succeed, right? That's been the core. It's been what is the thing that we give to our users. And, and I can tell you from business value, a really talented designer who is in the weeds creating great stuff and has the knowledge and experience to do that, that's worth more than 2 million sticky notes, right? And I think a lot of companies have figured this out. And so again, a lot of us benefited from it. Early days of it, I wrote a white paper on it at Microsoft for Bill Gates. Had kind of mixed feedback on it from him. But anyway, look, I've been in the weeds on it too. But I think it's at this point hurt the idea of design strategy more than it's helped, which is frustrating.
So with that in mind, what do you suggest people? Is it a case of changing the name design thinking, or because obviously you mentioned, trying to get the word design, or the motive of design thinking is obviously trying to get everyone involved within the business and thinking everyone is a designer. Obviously that is helpful to a degree because, designers want engineers to respect what they do and understand what they do, vice versa with the product manager and X, Y, and Z. What is a kind of better way to implement that without necessarily design thinking or the term design thinking? I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think one of the things that I think about is I hear a lot of designers say the business doesn't really understand what I do, right? And they don't fully appreciate all the value we bring. And I kind of turn it back around and I say, like, look, I don't fully understand what a CFO does, right? I don't have a nuanced, complete understanding of all the value that they bring and all the things that they do and everything, right? So it's not really fair to ask the business to have a deep understanding of what I do, right?
Yeah.
Fundamentally, it's what do we, you know, business leaders pay for what they get. They don't pay for the work that designers do. They pay for a design that is successful in the market, right? That is, design at its best is basically, everything in a business is a profit center or a cost center, right? It should be more aligned with a profit center. It should be like, oh, designers are going to give me something that I can then use to, make money out on the market. And that's fair. That's how businesses work. And so now in this new AI era, we have to show that, hey, we are engaging in such a way that increases your chances of success for whatever new AI driven experience that you're creating, and reduces your risk of failure. And there's been some very big catastrophic failures recently. And so if we can demonstrate that hey, we do X, Y, and Z, which results in you getting this, which greatly improves your odds of success, then we'll be fine, right?
Yeah.
There'll be a whole new burst of investment and energy and focus and everything in design again. And like I said, I think to sell that, we actually have to deeply think through like, okay, well, that is something different. And what is this new process? What is this new way of thinking? What are the new deliverables that we're going to have to be giving?
There's a lot of movement on LinkedIn around design thinking, and sometimes I see a lot of comments sort of being like, is this just a buzzword now? And do designers even kind of really understand what design thinking is? And then obviously you've kind of got, like you mentioned already, like those boot camps probably, which are feeding kind of younger designers like this design thinking, and they come out thinking, oh, I know everything now and I can get a job. And unfortunately, there's probably, there is a lot more to it. We've spoken about it already, about sort of the connection between kind of UX and UI design. Yes, why do you think it's traditionally been tied together? And kind of what are the implications of this when we move more into like an AI-driven world?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to this, businesses pay for what they get that has business value. And back in the industrial design era, and again, there's a lot of industrial design designers working today doing fantastic work, but clearly it's not the sort of the huge focus with superstar designers and everything that it was, back in the 90s, early 2000s. But we created fundamentally, from the business perspective, we defined three-dimensional objects that then could be manufactured and turned into products that they would sell, whatever, right? With UX, I think, there was an early understanding of, the UI of early software was absolutely horrific. You had to, even back with IBM, some of the early, business software, it came with all of them came with a book this thick of how to use it, right? And you almost had to take the equivalent of university classes to be able to fully use the software. Even Salesforce, to become a Salesforce admin, it's a multi-week intensive training program with a test at the end. It's almost like a pre-law or something. I don't know what, just to configure the software for your team, right? Unbelievably complicated things. And so they started understanding, if we can get somebody to define a UI that's much easier to use, that's simple, that's intuitive, that's beautiful, then that's a huge competitive advantage, right? So fundamentally it was, we delivered great UI, right? And again, and that speaks to, I think that literally some design firms are calling themselves UI UX. It's like they're actually focusing on the UI before, the design piece, which makes me crazy. But anyway, it happens a lot. Somebody told me that it's some of that's based on an algorithm of like you actually, your content is seen better if it's called UI UX than the other way around. But again, it's focusing on the wrong piece, right? And the challenge now, I think, is first of all, UI is a commodity, right? Between design systems, between open source components, between all existing patterns, software is all starting to look like each other a little bit, and you don't have to learn a new interaction model when you download a new app. It's pretty easy to just say, like, okay, I know exactly how these work, and everybody's got a hamburger menu up there, and all these patterns are sort of consistent. And so, companies have figured out, they can get to, good enough, or from my perspective, maybe almost good enough, really without design, or maybe a couple sort of, early stage designers who are just knocking out, Figma drawings based on existing stuff. And I think that's kind of, a big part of what started happening over the last couple of years is like, UI is not a differentiator anymore. And with AI, we're trying to get rid of UI. I mean, you look at, the ChatGPT app, it's basically a white screen, a logo, and a text field, right? There's no UI. And honestly, that should be the goal, right? Like, nobody loves UI. What people really want is a natural engagement. They want to get the information they want or the actions taken without having to fill out a form, right? Or deal with the rigid structure of data. And so that's, we have to face reality. UX is tied to UI, which is devalued. And just sort of like, again, what's happened in the past. Graphic design is absolutely still an important profession, but it's not the massively important superstar profession that it was, back in the 90s. And it's because, you can get things evolve, right? And I think that's what's happening here. And we have to accept UX is going to be important, in the future. But there's going to be a new star, and because the underlying technology has changed, and it's going to take a new mental model, new skill sets to be important to that new world.
Yeah, it's really interesting because even kind of without the evolution of kind of what this might mean when, AI involved and things like that, obviously it makes it even more interesting. But even just for kind of the product design roles that I'm hiring for at the moment, I mean, traditionally a couple of years ago, it was very UX heavy. Everyone wanted designers that, either UX designer in the title or it would be a product designer where they say end to end, but really more heavy on the kind of like the user experience side of things. But I've seen a real kind of shift at the moment where they're looking for product designers who have a real kind of visual leaning skill set. And that's been probably most roles that I've been working recently. And it's really interesting that we're having this conversation because the amount of portfolios that I look at, which actually don't necessarily cater to that UI design as much. CUX is probably paid a lot more back in the day as well, which one kind of went more to it. But initially, but it's really interesting to see where actually we've kind of created this, product design title, but how many real kind of unicorns, so to speak, do you really kind of come across? I mean, you've hired many designers, so I'm sure you've also looked at canvas and portfolios as well. Is it time for those to be separated again and kind of those professions and people, companies hire a UX designer and a UI designer instead of kind of calling someone a product designer? I wonder if there's going to be a bit of a shift there with AI involved as well. So yeah, it's quite an interesting take.
Absolutely. Have you seen a lot of also I'm hearing this, player coach, people want, they don't want sort of a design leader. They want a hands-on, someone who can generate output, because again, they're kind of devaluing the UI leadership aspects of things that, from our perspective, the UX leadership.
To some degree, we should always stay close to the tools and see them and everything along those sort of lines. But I'm speaking to a lot of design leaders who don't do that as much, and a lot of their job has been more strategic, and the market is hard at the moment, and
Yeah.
sort of been really struggling to find that role, because the company wants them to almost be a principal product designer, but with kind of that head of product design experience as well. So
Yeah.
it's really just a niche one, but we'll see. Hopefully it leads me into kind of like that new wave that we're going into.
Right.
Can you talk us through kind of this new wave of design and design evolution, and how do you think it like differs from previous waves?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, it goes back to this context thing. And so I just think about, okay, so we're having a conversation. So, if you ask me what's the weather going to be today here in Walnut Creek, I can say it's going to be sunny and pretty warm out, right? This past weekend, I would have told you like it's going to be really hot. If you ask me what the weather's going to be in a month, I might say the exact same thing. I might say it's going to be really hot, or it's probably sunny and warm, right? And so I'm using the exact same words, but there's a shrug, right? Because clearly I don't know, right? I'm guessing, and so there's a context there in that human delivery that is really, really important. And one of the challenges that I think we've seen with Gen AI systems in particular is there's no shrug, right? There's, I've been calling it God voice, because it basically, you can think, we had a tool that we worked with at McKesson that was trained on genomic data from cancer patients. When they do a genetics test of the specific type of cancer, you get trained results based on thousands of different genes, and it would provide recommendations of treatment that were again based on huge double-blind studies, blah blah blah, right? And so it could say this is that. In the exact same voice and in the exact same way, Google Gemini, they put this Gemini Gen AI tool right in the middle of their home screen for everybody, the Gemini or the Google search page. And one of the famous examples that came out early on was that it suggested that people, when they make pizza, that they add glue to the sauce, and it basically said, oh, this will help your pizza stick together better. And what's really amazing about that whole story, and of course it was super embarrassing, and then Google had to pull Gemini and say, like, oh, it's not ready, and now it's back a little bit, back and forth, right? But actually the stock took a major hit when that came out, because it's like, these guys aren't ready for prime time. So it was I don't remember the numbers, but it's a kind of a multi-billion-dollar hit to their valuation as a company. What's really interesting about it was it actually wasn't a hallucination. There was a Reddit thread apparently where somebody was joking about, if your pepperoni slides off the pizza, just add glue to the sauce and it'll stick together. And it became kind of a meme, right? And Gemini was. Wait, go ahead.
Because that does sound ridiculous.
Right, and it was funny as a meme, and I think that's why it kind of took off. And so, Gemini was trained on actual human answers to an actual question and provided it. It was not a hallucination in that case. But there was no shrug, right? Like if they had found a way in delivering the results to say, hey, I found this on Reddit, right? Hey, I'll tell you what it says, but you decide for yourself how much you want to trust it. It would have been actually kind of cool. It would have been funny, people. But instead, it said you should put glue in your pizza sauce with the God voice. The same God voice is like, here are your genomics results of your cancer test. And again, there needed to be a design engagement there to say, what's the level of understanding here. But that doesn't exist right now. You don't see any AI tools that have a design engagement where they say, hey, how do we express our confidence level? And how do we help the user understand this is how we generated this answer? and this is why it might be good or bad. Another example that I was thinking of is just, all these systems are different, right? And how they're configured. And if you think about like at an engineering college, if you go to a Gen AI tool and say, what's 7 plus 3, it's an engineering college. So that probably what they'll do is have it configured so they say, okay, it's probably a math, science, or engineering question, right? Oh, this looks like a math question. Okay, let's split this in half. Let's ask a scientific calculator. I'll plug in the numbers and see what the result is. And the other half is let's look at a addition table and go through it and see what the number is. And both come up with the number 10. It compares the numbers. It says, okay, both agree, and then it comes back saying, okay, we're highly confident that the answer is 10, right? If you just use a generic Gen AI tool that's free, what it's probably going to do is say, okay, I've got the word 7 plus and 3. Okay, so the highest likely output is 10. The second highest might be 73. The third highest might be some like pop song that's like 7 parties. So fundamentally, like it gave you the right answer, but it was that close to give you something that you'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? So both gave you the exact same answer, but one was super confident because it's a very expensive, complicated system built to make sure. And the other one, again, is this kind of tool, and they both are speaking in the same voice. And I think if designers were involved, they would deliver those answers in a very different way. And so as companies struggle with this problem and have very big multi-billion-dollar expensive mistakes, and we get a new form of design again, we've started calling it reflexive design. Hopefully we'll see more and more opportunities of people saying like, yeah, I really do need a designer to help people understand this is the result, and this is how we created it, and this is how you should think about it. Right?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. I just wanted to kind of go back to what you were saying around the two types of tools, one sort of, and how confident we are with using them. I think I noticed on ChatGPT the other day that I can't remember the full quote, but I'm sure it went on there now to say it, but right by the text bar it says, any output from ChatGPT isn't 100% accurate. So they kind of have like a disclaimer there now, just to make sure that, but it'd be really, even just thinking out loud from what you've mentioned, it'd be actually great to use these tools. And if you type something in, like said, have that scaling system of like, this is 8 out of 10 accurate, just so you know what it is. Because I think at the moment, a lot of these tools, and I mean, common sense probably comes into it with us as human beings at the moment to not take ChatGPT or another type of tools so very similar as this is 100% accurate. So yeah, it's definitely like you're almost having to like proofread it. It's just there as I guess to just help with productivity at the moment.
And especially when you start seeing things that the other famous, I'm picking on Gemini, but example was, yeah, well, they gave some reason to pick on them. Recently, somebody got a result. I don't remember exactly the prompt that they put in, but Google or Gemini was saying there's this professor or a doctor at Berkeley who recommends that you have rocks in your diet, and you can add stones or pebbles or different kind of rocks to ice cream or yogurt or something like that, and like it gave guidance. So the name of the doctor and all this stuff, it gave guidance as to how you should be eating these rocks. And again, it's like, but with no context of saying like, hey, this was created through a generative, word prompts type of thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so, there should be some visual design, there should be some, so like, yeah, there's the static kind of legal disclaimer that they're putting on right now, but that's not context, If there was in there, highlighted with some information saying like, hey, double check this, or
Yeah.
or this is the type of thing, and the other big piece of it that's really important is prompt design. And so like prompt engineers, that's becoming a real thing, because how you ask the question really determines in large part what you get out of it. And so you can get somebody who might be really understanding the systems that might ask about some people might not like this, but my favorite football team is the Seahawks. That's not very popular in the Bay Area, but it's a Seattle team.
Okay.
You might say like, okay, can you provide examples of of analysis about how their season's going to go, right? And that can help the system kind of figure out, oh, I'm going to look for this sort of information and give a synthesis about. And then somebody else might go like, yo, what's up with the Hawks? We as humans can understand those are actually the same question, right? And respond in a certain way, but a system has no idea how to do that. And so how do we help users understand how to engage with these systems? Because they're human-esque, but they're not human, right? They don't have the capacity to understand, some of the like social nuances and things that humans provide. And so they just do the math on the input.
Yeah. I wonder if we'll ever get to that stage. I think it's hard to know, I guess, isn't it? But
Well, I hope
guess
for our
it's
sake that we do, right? I think designers should have a huge role to play in that context, providing context real time, helping users understand, hey, here's how to engage with the system to make it work for you better, right? To give you what you want.
awesome. And I guess leading into that really, really nicely, I suppose, is there any sort of strategies you think that like designers should be like adopt to put themselves as like essential players in this kind of new technological landscape?
Yeah, well, one of the things I've been talking a lot about industrial design, but I think this reminds me of that in a lot of senses. So to be an industrial designer, you really have to understand materials. You have to understand manufacturing, tooling, shipping, all these different things, and be able to speak deeply with engineers about all sorts of different, very complex, physical aspects of things, heat management and optics and blah, 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 right? And so that's just kind of part of the profession. You can't be a successful industrial designer unless you really understand how things work, not like an engineer, but well enough to talk to an engineer and adapt your design to make sure that it actually delivers, right? That it does what it's supposed to do. That hasn't been, you find a huge range of technical knowledge in UX designers, and honestly, you haven't really had to understand the back-end technologies for UX. And especially as we've gotten into things like, React, front-end development, stuff like that, like you really don't need to know how the back-end works necessarily. For, I think, this new generation, it's going to be more like industrial design. You have to understand the underlying technologies. There's a ton of variation in Gen AI systems. I mean, AI is not a thing. It's a collection of dozens of things that are assembled in certain ways to, to take data and, to respond to prompts, take data and then generate outputs. And so you have to understand the pieces and how they work and what are the limitations and what are the costs of it as well, right? Any Gen AI system can be made to be incredibly accurate if you're willing to spend $20 per prompt, right? That's not doable. So unless, you would spend that if it's something like a genomics test, right? Where you're going to spend whatever it takes to make sure the AI prompt is absolutely accurate based on trained data and understood concepts, et cetera. And so that's key for sure. And another, the next big one I think is going to be, it's not probably the classic double diamond. The key output for, I'm going to keep calling them reflexive designers, and that'll make my wife happy as well. She loves that term. But, the double diamond UX, design process and, spending a lot of time on Figma, generating drawings and things like that. I don't think that's going to be how this goes. User research is probably going to be a massive part of it. We had a project at McKesson, again, the genomics tool that I've been talking about. We started working on that when I was at McKesson, and person on my team, phenomenal designer, spent probably, there was a UI element, but that took hours, maybe days at the most. It was months of understanding oncologists, right? So oncologists are not geneticists. So trying to understand, their workflow, where in the treatment process would they be interested in doing genomic testing? What would they do with it? How well do they understand the treatment recommendations, and how comfortable would they be utilizing a tool, and what context would we have to provide to them about, hey, here's all of the, the double-blind studies and sort of certified regimens that we're recommending, and how to make, to be confident in that. So user research is going to be a huge part of this, and an in-depth of understanding, these users, their understanding of what we're doing, and then, like I said, the context. Not here's the result, good luck, have at it, but here's the result with a lot of information about how to understand it, and what you should trust and what you shouldn't, and what you should do with it, etc. And I don't really know yet what that output looks like. What is the thing that companies get? I'm sure, there's some ideas forming, but it's not going to look like traditional UX design, I don't think.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, I'm excited to see how it plays out myself, to be honest. And I'm sure even probably in the next year or two, it's because it just is advancing so quickly.
So fast.
We're probably going to, we're just, every day you're like, oh, there's something new. I mean, even when ChatGPT came out, everyone was like mind blown. Everyone was like, what?
Mind blown. It's interesting, because, like I said, AI has been around for decades, but that was the moment where all of a sudden people had access to like the core of it, and it went crazy. And I think we're definitely past the peak of the hype curve, right? And so a lot of people are, this is why I think there's so much potential for design. I think a lot of companies right now have spent an absolutely enormous amount of money on NVIDIA processors and AI engineers, and haven't yet seen a return on that. And so there's going to be a lot of panic here, I think, soon from business leaders who are like, I've got to get a tool that's effective, that is, successful. And right now, a lot of the tools that have launched, again, have failed at the human engagement level. So if we can figure out how we engage in this process, and how to describe that for business, we can help them succeed, and that will be great for everybody involved.
There's a lot of people obviously dismissing AI, and obviously then, like we mentioned, there's a lot of scenarios that it's valuable, but sometimes, obviously, like we mentioned, it kind of gets a bad rep in the news. Some AI tools have failed and things like that. So, I mean, do you think that really reflects like the reality of like Gen AI's potential, or what's your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, what we've been focusing on is in Glissade is really this idea that there's a lot of patterns, and if you find patterns, repetitive patterns, you can create tools that help eliminate a lot of drudgery. And a great example of that, kind of a light bulb moment for me, was my partner Elliot. And so Glissade, my two partners, key partners are David Townsend. We've been working together as designers since Art Center, actually. We were roommates at Art Center, and we've worked together for decades, off and on. And then Elliot Levitt, who was one of my key engineering partners at McKesson. He was VP of engineering for a whole suite of products within the company. But just on his own, he realized as we were forming Glissade that he was going to have to go through his emails, and he's interested in everything. And so he subscribes to stuff all over the place. And so he gets hundreds of emails. And, he was thinking, oh my God, do I actually have to spend, going through all of these takes hours. And so he on his own, just over a weekend, took an iMac that he had that was just sitting in a closet, bunch of available AI technologies, and he built a tool for himself that takes all of his emails. They all go through this tool, and it sorts them by, like, here's some emails that you really need to respond to right away. Here's a bunch that you should probably take a look at. Here's some that you might be interested in, and then here's a whole bunch that I'm just going to hide from you because you don't care about. And one of the things he would talk about is I don't remember if it's Levi's or who, but he's like, I'll get an email about jeans every single week. I don't buy jeans every week. I only care about vacation destinations when I'm vacation planning, et cetera, right? So, and so it took, a couple hours of sorting through all of his emails down to, I think he spends 3 minutes looking at this. And then he goes just straight to the emails he's got to respond to, and he's basically done. And it's like, available technologies, did it over a weekend, radical improvement to his, the user experience benefit of that to him was incredible, right? From, a couple hours down to 3 minutes, with more confidence that he's actually caught what he's supposed to catch. But by far the most complicated part of that project was the question of so what am I interested in? Is the human piece, right? How do you train this so it would give him what he wanted? And of course, he did that training himself, but that speaks to it was mostly a design problem. It was mostly a user research problem, synthesizing information by value, right? And so I think that's a great example. And another one I heard recently was there was a researcher who was supposed to look at the how Amazon's business strategy has changed over the past decade. And if you think about, if you do that manually, kind of the way we would have done it a couple of years ago, you take days and go through all of the annual reports and put sticky notes all over the place of this and that, and it would take you, days just to try and get to the first of what are they thinking? And she just basically fed all of these into a Gen AI tool and said, look for the differences. And in minutes, it spit out, they're no longer talking about pharmacy, physical real estate pharmacies. They're no longer talking about, there's a bunch of sort of changes that it output. And so it let her focus, instead of all that sort of drudgery of trying to read the fine print of annual reports and parse out little hidden sentences that, it allowed her to focus purely on so what does that mean, right? Using sort of the top of her thinking rather than the bottom of her manual labor, right? So that's what we're really interested in, is finding patterns like that make a huge, immediate impact.
No, 100%. And I guess talking about impact, is there any specific areas of within design where you think or have seen AI already making a significant impact?
Yeah, well,
just mentioned.
Well, the genomics testing that we did, there's been a bunch of different examples. First of all, there's impact for designers. There's a lot of great Gen AI tools that have, made it much faster to create, different variations of concepts, different ideas. But I'm mostly interested in the design's ability to help create the output. Another
Yeah.
example that I heard recently was, I think it was the European like some social services organization, European Social Services Organization, and they got something like, I don't remember specifics, somebody might correct me, but it's something like 70,000 emails a day. It's fundamentally impossible to manually go through all those and parse out. And there was some small percentage, 5, 10% or something, that were immediately actionable. And then a whole bunch that are just like, you guys are great, you guys suck, whatever, right? And so they built a tool that basically said, let's extract the immediately actionable emails and assign them to people. And the other ones, let's basically extract out their core concepts and their, the overall feeling, right? And it's like, okay, we've got a lot of people who are very upset, and here are the key buzzwords of what they're talking about. But that parsing out those ones that were actionable, they apparently took the response times on people sending in a request, service request email from months down to like a couple of days. And if you did it by hiring more people, you would have to hire like tens of thousands of people to go through all that. And so again, huge impact on the employees of that company, but especially the people who are like, can you just fix this thing, right? And it's like, no, they can't fix it because they'll never see your email. Well, now they see the email. And it's like, oh yeah, I can fix that in 10 minutes. So these are the kind of, again, it's finding patterns and then generating output that has a real immediate human impact. So I think that's, that's where designers can focus and be hugely valuable.
Yeah. And is there any you mentioned kind of tools that designers use? I appreciate lots of people mention stuff like this all the time, but just a kind of hot take on any kind of Gen AI tools or any AI tools that you believe really are truly valuable for designers. Have you got any on the top of your head?
Well, it's interesting. Figma's been doing a pretty amazing job of bringing in, automated like design system generators and things like that. But we saw the flip side not long ago of, I think it was was it a media app? You could basically have it auto-generate a media app, and it was pretty much identical to Apple's, and so all these things, again, it's context. It's like, how is this trained, and can it tell you, and how do you double check the results? Because if anybody used some of that output directly, they'd get a lawsuit. So they're all interesting, powerful, a little bit dangerous if you don't understand them. And Figma, of all companies, hopefully has got the design chops to start engaging on the context piece for themselves, right? And to help users understand how to do that as well.
What new and exciting or new areas and industries do you see kind of for exciting opportunities for designers to collaborate with AI? Are there any kind of thoughts on that?
It's interesting. It's hard to think of a single industry that's not going to be affected by this. The potential really is absolutely remarkable, and when these technologies are used in the right way, and so. We're super interested. One of the ones, we've got a lot of healthcare focus within Glissade. And, one of the tools that we're very anxious to work with companies on is physician notes, and something that we were talking about, McKesson. Fundamentally, doctors, when they see a patient, it's very common that it's a repetitive sort of thing. You've got my kids are really into watching House, and so we watch that, and there's always some hyper bizarre explanation, but that's not the typical thing. When somebody comes in and they've got strep throat, you say, okay, you want to do this test, want to prescribe this medication, and add this ICD-10 code for insurance reimbursement, right? Over and over and over. And they manually write this over and over and over. And so a Gen AI tool there, would be phenomenal to say hey, it's not generative from the standpoint of like, let me try and guess something that you might want to write. It would be looking at like, hey, you've had 1,000 strep cases in your career. You've always written this, this, and this. You've always prescribed that. You've always applied this ICD-10 code. Do you want to do it again? Like, yes. Okay. And so, that's the type of thing. And, you talk to doctors, they're writing, a lot of them go home after work, sit in bed with a laptop and assign insurance ICD-10 codes and finish off patient notes. And they have to do it thoroughly each time because they're worried about liability, right? And so, if we could take that from hours that they do when they're supposed to be sleeping down to seconds at the moment, based on trained data that and based on giving them an opportunity to see it before accepting, that's the type of tool that we're super interested in working on, and that could be incredibly meaningful to these people. Yeah. Yeah. And every job has got some piece of it, right? You think to almost anything. You think of, business people, you think of government people, you think of teachers, right? Putting together lessons plans, reviewing test scores. Like, look, these tests are being manually reviewed, and they're the simplest thing in the world. It should be like hit a button, boom, every kid's got a grade based on, if it's a math test, it doesn't require deep analysis of each question, and so why spend their time doing that rather than thinking about, oh, how could I do something cool to engage my students tomorrow? It would be a fun way of teaching this new thing. So, I think there's so much opportunity and things like that everywhere. Right? Yeah, I mean, that's massive, right? And it's interesting that I've mostly heard designers talk about ethics and AI. I'm sure they're not the only ones. But it seems like, we actually created a role within Salesforce of AI ethics. I forget what the title was, but it was basically an AI ethics role, and to make sure that we were using these things appropriately. And there's been some de-investment in companies that we've heard about that, I think OpenAI, Google, Facebook, a couple of these companies have kind of de-invested in some of these pieces. So, for designers, as we're building something, to put that in the core of our thinking. And again, I think it goes to a lot of that context. A bad Gen AI prompt, like put rocks in your food, isn't so dangerous if we have, what's that? And let's pray that nobody did that, right? But it wouldn't be that dangerous of a prompt if it had clear context that basically said, hey, here's how to be careful with these results, right? But just putting it out there, there's a lot of risks. What if somebody, that one's not maybe a very likely one, but maybe there's another closed prompt that says, like, put a whole bunch of pepper in this or something, and it's enough that somebody has an allergic reaction or something, right? So there's, so I think that's going to be a core part for sure of, if it's reflexive designer, it's reflexive designer, right? How do we evaluate this thing to make sure that it's safe? And not allow it to, and then there's adjacent things. Another great example was, some of the early image generators, there was all these examples of, if you asked it to say, generate an image of a doctor, they generated all white male, they generate a white male in a lab coat, and people looked at that and they're like, that's really embarrassing, and it's also really inaccurate, and so then they, intentionally tweaked these tools to say it's got to express more diversity. And then this is, again, I'm sorry if anybody from Google is listening. I'm really beating the crap out of Gemini, but they've just given some great examples recently. They use the Gemini Gen AI tool to say, create images of the American founding fathers, and who were all white men. And it created images of Native Americans in full headdress, and black founding fathers and Asian founding fathers. And it's like, okay, well, that's actually also embarrassing, because the fact is, we were not a diverse country at our founding, right? There were not, it was exclusively white men then. And if you want to accurately reflect who they were, you can't apply these filters that are intended to represent where we are or where we aspire to be today. These are really complex issues, and I think this is, and again, it requires a design type of brain, not just an engineer, right, who's going to apply algorithms, but it requires somebody evaluating these tools and saying, how do we think about the complexities of society, of humans, and integrate that into how these things work, and understanding how they work well enough that you can say, okay, what can we do, and where are we going to make mistakes, and how can we inform users, hey, we're probably going to make a mistake here, be prepared for it. Absolutely, absolutely. It's a requirement, right? Absolutely requirement. Yeah, well, I mean, look, the first thing is it's embrace change, right? The and again, I'm sure a lot of UX designers are going to say, hey, we have all the skill sets and the tools and everything to do this. And but my personal perception is, UX is so associated with UI, you're not going to get the job to do this. That the and it was the same when I was at IBM. We hired a lot of industrial designers because with especially with the sort of enterprise focused teams, because all that systems thinking that industrial designers had that was really appropriate to try and understand like how a company is going to use big data. But they were not industrial designers when they were hired. They were hired as a UX designer, and it doesn't really matter what you think about it. So I think embrace the idea that there's going to be a new version of design. It's not the same as UX design. It leverages a ton of skill sets and a lot of the knowledge, but it's not the same. So embrace this new thing. Embrace, learning about these technologies. If I've heard a lot of people saying like, oh, a designer, AI can't be creative or AI can't be this or that. Look, sure, of course it's got limitations, and that's going to be your job to understand those limitations and also the rate of the improvement on those limitations. And you design for where it's going to be, not where it is, right? And we have to embrace that idea if we want to be relevant in the space. And I think we have to have designers who are relevant to the space for these technologies to be valuable to people. And then I think we collectively as an industry are going to have to think really hard about like, okay, so how does our process change, and what is it? What do we provide? And clearly, user research is a big part of it. But like, what's the deliverable? It's not going to be Figma drawings. What's the thing that they're buying? And I think that's going to require a lot of designers creatively thinking about it, and saying like, okay, how do we communicate our thinking towards AI engineers who are building the systems so that they can build something that reflects what we think it should be.
I'm excited to see kind of what the future looks like as well. And I just appreciate you coming on my podcast video series today and just being able to have this platform and sort of educate and share your ideas. And if anyone who is watching wants to kind of discuss with you these plans, I think it's going to take probably more than our voice. But there's more kind of leaders and designers and anyone really, engineers, anyone that kind of has these same type of views. We want to be educating kind of the CEOs of the world and having the designer leader right next to them, because going to need kind of more voices. So I've really appreciated having you on and having this conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're at the first kind of 1 or 2% of this conversation, and it's going to take a lot of people engaging deeply and a lot of debate and creativity. And I'm so happy that that we had this conversation. We had the initial conversation that led to us doing this podcast, and your interest and engagement on this, and it's just been fantastic.
I needed the world to hear it. So thank you so much. You've been an amazing guest today. And for those watching, you'll be able to listen to this on Spotify. You'll be able to watch this on YouTube. And if you enjoy Inez Talks UX, please hit subscribe. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.